doing that, I think one of the first hurdles that we come across is comparing, as an example, a virtual machine in Azure, comparing that to a piece of hardware or a physical server that we go out and purchase and host somewhere and license. And oftentimes it's almost a direct comparison of what is that box going to cost me to what does a virtual machine over a period of time cost me. Now, when we start to look at everything that cloud unlocks, and especially some of the, I wouldn't say hidden features, but the features in the background that really sit across as all of cloud, we start to see that it really is bigger than just, say, the hardware purchase. When we look and put together a few examples here, so one, obviously the actual purchase and going out and spending CapEx on a piece of tin. When we start to look at the world of cloud, it is much more of a pay-as-you-go model. And really, when we talk pay-as-you-go, to unbuzzword that, it's use what you need today and exactly what you need today. And if you need more tomorrow, you can scale up with that. And if you need less tomorrow, you can equally scale down. So pay as you go really just translates into using exactly what you need today, as opposed to the world of hardware. And I'm sure we've all been down that path of, well, I'm going to have this for about 5 years. What does my requirement in that 5-year period look like? And you end up buying way more than you actually need today. And every hour or day that those resources sit dormant, that's cost that is spent and out of the business that is not actually generating any sort of value for you. So a big part of the drive, and you'll see it translates across everything we do in cloud, is use what you're using to use exactly what you need today. And if that's a number of 365 seats, or it's the resources on a server, it's about keeping those costs aligned with the true need in as you stand today. Now, we start to look at some of the other values that come out, and power seems to be the leading topic in conversations around the country and I think around the world. So when we look at from a power perspective, and this one actually directly translates into not only efficiency of your operations, so considering man hours of keeping the lights on, but also starts to look very directly at cost. And if we look at the model of having a server in your office, that then comes with a requirement of, if you want to achieve the type of uptimes that we need in today's world of digital transactions, you need to start looking at things like having a UPS in place, having a generator that then tops up that UPS, then having multiple contracts with generator maintenance staff and companies to deliver diesel and come out and service. And there are so many aspects that start to add up. Now, in the traditional I'm moving to cloud business case that is done by a lot of organizations, none of this gets brought into the actual cost of running on-prem. We usually, at least from the ones I've seen, and many people stop at row one. I'm buying the hardware. It'll cost me 100,000 Rand today, or it's going to cost me a couple grand a month. And if I work it out over, especially if we start to depreciate things over wild periods of time, those numbers can look very convincing towards the on-prem side. Now, if we add in, as an example, the cost of a generator contract over that same period of time, plus however much you're going to be pouring into diesel at going on 30 Rand a litre these days, there are real costs involved in not only running the infrastructure, but keeping that infrastructure running from all the peripherals around it. Another side is space. And I think that for a big portion of organizations out there, they don't actually own the premise that they're in. And especially as we've seen ways of work change and having people working from home and distributed in different ways, we've seen a lot of organizations looking for new premise and adjusting what their requirements are. So either downscaling or moving into different areas. Now, if you have to account for a server room, that is square meters that come with a direct cost to lease out or rent out that space. So again, we have all of these costs that lump on top of each other. And when we look in the world of cloud, that one VM's cost that we considered in the very first step includes in it all of these factors, from not having to have space, not having to power it, not having to have physical security is another phenomenal example. I always say to customers, I don't care how great your firewall is. If I can walk straight past it with a flash drive, it renders it moot. Now, that whole aspect of physical security becomes incredibly important and has a direct cost of security contracts and CCTV and tag systems. And I think that as we look at these various cost implications, it starts to make that business case for cloud look a lot more attractive than when we leave these out and consider them sunk business expenses. Now, the other side is there is real cost to being in the cloud. And I think that when we move into a world of cloud and we start to adopt very different ways of utilizing services, and we look less at a CapEx with depreciation over a period of time, and we look more at what do I need at this point in time? And also, what can I switch on and switch off? And we're going to go into the actual portal now. And I always say my number one rule in Azure of maintaining cost is if it can be switched off, switch it off, because a cost of zero is the best savings you're going to get. So if you have, say, a service that is only used during the day, and you can switch it off from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning, that's half of the time. And if we consider that a lot of these services are billed by the hour, if you can directly switch them off for half of the time, that is a 50% savings off the bat. Now, we know there are some platforms that cannot be switched off. So the second part of the rule is if it can't be switched off, reserve it. And we'll go into what the reservations look like. And that's really, if I can sum up a reservation in its simplest form, it's like buying a voucher. So I buy a voucher for the VM, and what that voucher says is instead of billing me by hour, I pay a flat fee for the month at a discounted rate, and I pay that fee every month. So it's something that needs to be on 24 hours a day for the foreseeable future, reserve that resource. Something that can be switched off, switch it off. Now, with all of that said, I want to jump into Azure and have a look at some of the tools that Microsoft has included in the platform. And you would have seen some of the name changes going out into the market and moving from Azure to Azure Plan, or the other term is NCE, or New Commerce Experience. And really what this has been is an effort by Microsoft to provide better visibility to the end customer of what are they spending on, what resources are being consumed at any point in time, and then also start to provide real feedback and inputs into how to optimize those environments. And once we're in the cloud, we have phenomenal insights into the actual utilization of resources. So it's not just about can the VM be switched on and off? It's what percentage of the CPU am I actually using on this VM? Do I need it? And would a smaller version actually suffice? So let's jump into the portal and have a look at exactly how we make this information available to you so that you can have a constant grasp on what those costs are. And I think that it's not so much about cloud being this wildly expensive platform. A lot of it comes from the uncertainty of could it scale without me knowing about it and having that kind of wariness around being hit with this scary bill at the end of the month. And what I want to show you is there should never be a scary bill, because you know day by day or even through the day exactly what you've spent so far and have the ability to forecast for the rest of the month. So let me jump into Azure. Fantastic. So one quick tip, and I'm actually going to jump right back to the homepage. I see a lot of time when I'm working with various people who work in the Azure portal, we tend to spend a lot of time looking for what we're actually looking for. And there are millions and millions of options. And as you start to cascade these out, it can become a maze. And equally, the platform changes all the time. So my first top Dave's tip of the day is just search for everything. It really is phenomenal how well you can get to where you need to be just by searching. So we want to start with cost management. And as the name implies, this is where you come to manage all of the areas that are related to what does the cloud actually cost me. So we're going to start off, I want to go into cost analysis. So that's really where we would start is let's have a look at what are we spending today. And not only what are we spending today, but what have we spent over the last however long you've been on the platform, and to gain insights and trends out of that so we can make informed decisions around, is a resource worth reserving, as an example? What would switching this off for 6 hours or 12 hours a day look like? Now, once we come into cost analysis, you'll see that there are a bunch of new views. This is, for anyone familiar with Azure, one of the screens that's been quite heavily updated in the recent few months. And every update has really provided deeper and deeper insights into exactly what's going on in your environment. One of my favorites is accumulated costs, so we're going to start there. And this gives you great visibility into what is being spent across specific resources and where this becomes incredibly important. So anyone in finance or actually anyone in IT who gets asked by finance to do the cost allocation, this becomes a phenomenal tool for you where you can actually come in here and once configured, get reports that you can log in, download once a month and send off to finance. So anyone who's being chased for cost allocation every month, or anyone who knows by moving to the cloud they're going to be chased, this becomes a great way or a great reason to start engaging with us and with Torito around how do we set you up in such a way, and how do we even go into historical environments and set up that view for you. So we start here. You'll see that we're in the current month, and I can see off the bat here what that trend of spend has been, and I can see that there's no big spikes. Everything looks quite flat, so I know that it's a pretty stable environment. If we come down from here, you'll start to see that the metrics actually start to get broken down by different services. So what am I spending on storage versus my virtual machines? What regions am I spending money in? And you'll see that actually within each of these, there are hundreds of different, or there are many different views that are available. So these are off the bat. What I want to show you, and especially when we're talking cost allocation, things like resource groups are one great methodology to use. If you can plug all the resources for a specific project or specific department into a resource group, that becomes a tag by which you can separate out the costs. The other way is actually by tagging. So very similarly to say how Google search works, where you can go in and add different tags, you can tag resources across resource groups, or say across the subscriptions in the same tenant, and start to get a view of what am I spending on. Say if a project consumes resources across different departments, you can get a view across that. So here's a view by resource group, and what I want to show you is in the main view here, if we start to come, let's say I want to see for the last 3 months, we're going to group it by resource group name. I don't want to see a graph. Graphs are great for quick views, but I actually want to see monthly and give me a table. Now, give that a second to populate here, and you'll see that this starts to become a very useful tool in order to provide information back to the business. So for the last 3 months, I now have a view by, we see the different resource group names here, splits across those 3 months, and I can see exactly what each of them has cost me for that period of time. I then also have the ability to download this into an Excel sheet and keep the bean counters happy and send them lots of Excel. So if you need to download a view and you know, getting finance departments as an example to log into Azure can be a challenge or maybe undesirable. So there is yes.
I'll just interrupt quickly. So
of course,
to put this in a practical example, because I see your resource group names are a little tricky, is stop me if I'm not correct, but you could, for instance, make an HR group and the leave database or the timesheet program or whatever those workflows, servers are, you could allocate them to a resource group. Finance has Sage running, and they've got maybe 2 databases that mirror each other, but it's all finance related. So you group that as finance. And then when you pull this report, you could say, finance consumed this amount of resources in Azure, it cost this amount of money, HR did this, sales had this CRM program running,
100%, yeah.
whatever. So just a practical example for the people in the room.
Yeah, 100%. Now, a very good point, Colin. I do have a bunch of techie names for my resource groups, but exactly that, as Colin said, these could read finance, HR, and sales, and the resources being consumed by them can be put into those groups to allow for that allocation. Equally, we could do excuse me, it may be for a defined project. So one way might be for departments. You might be running a promotion as an example, and you need to have additional resources applied to your systems for that promotion. You could even tag the additional resources that are being consumed for a promotion so that you know there's a direct cost associated to running it. It gives you a lot more visibility that a lot of these costs have been hidden for some time, and not hidden, and they've just been difficult to access. And by doing that, when we ran promotions or we set up new systems, it was very tricky to allocate the specific costs attributed to that program to a cost center. Now we can do that by resource groups, by tagging. There are many different mechanisms to start to get that granularity. But what I will say is it is very much around how these platforms are set up. And there is a phase of getting them set up to deliver the information you want. Azure will not off the bat know what your departments are or what your projects are. So if we set them up and we tag them on day one, it then gives you that granularity over time. So while we're in here, obviously, great views can be downloaded. You obviously have the ability to go in and do historical views. So there's either current month, which is great for tracking today, so I know roughly what my bill's going to be. And actually, if we go back to this month, it includes an element of forecast. So again, to avoid that shock bill element, there is an element. If we go back, let me do accumulated and give us an area graph. Oh, nice. So there we go. You can see that we've got our cost to date. And again, we can start to split out this graph by different, in this case, resource groups, but it could be by departments. And then equally, we start to see a forecast. So I know that based on my current trajectory and the resources I have running at this point in time, that's roughly where my bill is going to end. You will note, and sorry, I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, that everything is in US dollars. We do deal with a massive American beast called Microsoft, so everything in their realm is in the US dollar. However, that's where dealing with a partner like Torito and working with Torito and CloudMania, we do the localized billing and localized transactions. So instead of having to spend massive dollars on a credit card, that's really one of the huge benefits of having a local partner is one, local billing, and also that local touch point of I can phone a South African number, I can get hold of Colin and the crew, and there are phenomenal resources available to you once you sign up and start consuming your Azure through Torito, as opposed to some of the other cloud methods where you can go online and buy lots with a credit card. What it doesn't get you is that hands-on approach and the knowledge that comes with working with a partner. I want to go one step back now. So we had a quick look at obviously the tables and the views, and really there's a lot of information that you can drill down into. And as you see, these are all interactive. So I can start to drill down into very specifically what am I spending my cloud spend on. If we go one level back, you'll start to see that the other aspects of cost management are alerts, budgets, and recommendations. So from an alerting point of view, alerts and budgets are very similar, but it's around adding rules to notify you. And again, this is so you don't have to log in and watch the portal all day, every day. You're more than welcome to. There's some great graphs here. But equally, we want to set up alerts that if our spend does start to pick up or start to hit certain thresholds, we will be alerted way ahead of time. So not 2 months in the future when I get my invoice, because at that point, it's an invoice and it's almost too late. We want to set up alerts and set up budgets around giving you that visibility at that point in time, so you can then take the actions that are required. And it might be that, oh, we know our spend is going to be higher this month. We're running a phenomenal promotion and we're seeing the sales come in. So great, let that spend go. Or it could be that, a service generating storage that we weren't aware of, and we go and investigate and fix the problem. So it really is around having that visibility and having that visibility sooner so that we can take the actions and keep that cost within the metrics that we are aware of and happy with. Very similarly for budgets, budgets are just a great tracking mechanism, and a lot of the budgets then become the triggers for the alerts. So these two really work hand in hand, and it gives you great visibility, and also gives you that catch net that if you set up, as an example, alerts, what we do is we generally push those to a group rather than an individual. Leave happens, people leave. So yeah, it's always great to send an alert off to a group of people who can take then immediate action on what they see. The last one I want to quickly show you is around recommendations, and you'll see this will populate in a second. And what's great with recommendations is it gives you real world actionable recommendations around how to save costs. Now, you'll see there are potential yearly savings, and you can see the exact cost metrics or the potential savings that you can unlock. And equally, these are actually clickable actions. So rather than just having a list of, well, we think that your VMs need to be resized, go off and find out how to do that. We can go in here and see VM by VM exactly what size it is right now, what the recommendation is, and then we can actually see the usage patterns that are causing that recommendation. Now, it's not to say that these are all come through and just action all of them. As an example, in this case, we know that there are peaks expected, so we need to maintain a specific level of resources. So we don't action all of these, but it does give you a great place to come in and view these recommendations and actually click through and action them in real time. So those cost savings are far easier to unlock as opposed to just getting a list of or an invoice with a list of VMs that look expensive. You can come in here and get actionable insights where, as Torito, as Microsoft, and as your cloud partner, we want to help you spend less with us. We fully believe that as we help you optimize these costs and use exactly again what you need today, we can then start to reinvest that into new technologies. We can look at how we make your business more efficient. And I think it ultimately benefits all of us. So actionable insights in the recommendations. And again, great place to analyze your cost, understand what's going on, be made aware of where you are in a month. So have those alerts in place to catch it, so that if you don't log in today, but you happen to hit that metric, you'll be alerted, and then get those recommendations where you can actually go through an action and have real impact on your savings. Cool. I think we're going to jump. Are there any quick questions on cost analysis or the costing side before we pop over to migrations? Also happy to field them at the end, but if we can, happy to take one now, maybe, if there is one.
David, there is Rowan has asked, and maybe it is an appropriate time to look at this. Will you be touching on managing costs, particularly with SQL as a service, where transactions and traffic are charged for? Very difficult to control and preempt.
Yeah, so not going to be touching on it specifically in this session, but definitely a very and obviously SQL with all of its components, one of those items that attracts a good portion of costs in the cloud. So I think you said it was Rona asked, would love to have a session specifically around SQL optimization, and there are some very great tools involved. It would probably take me more than the hour we have, but yeah, more than happy to have a session specifically around SQL and can share that. What I can say is, I mean, we don't have any running in here, but SQL is one of the items that is included in your advisor recommendations. So whether it's advice around reserving of resources, optimizing the compute behind them, these are not only for VMs. These recommendations extend into many of the as a service offers. So whether it's database as a service or storage, you equally will get recommendations in here. I just only happen to have VMs, but it's not limited to that. And I think that as we start to move into a world of serverless computing, we're seeing a trend of not running VMs in the cloud, but actually running database as a service or containerization or web apps. There are phenomenal tools out there that speak directly into making you more efficient, in that in the same way we don't want you running generators in order to run a server. Why should you have to run a virtual machine with an OS and with patching and all of these items? If you can remove another layer, it again makes you more efficient in focusing on exactly what you need. You need a database. You don't need a Windows license and VMs and all sorts of other things. You just need a database. So consume a database. But very interesting topic, and would love to have a follow-up session. And I'm sure there's a few people on the call who would like to join. So Colin, maybe we do a full SQL day at some point. Cool. Let's jump into migration. I want to keep ahead of the time here. So quickly before we do migration, I wanted to mention the marketplace. It is a phenomenally powerful tool, and also speaks into the migration side, in that when moving to the cloud, there seems to be an impression of, I'll have to get rid of the vendors I know and use only Microsoft, or only the tools that are in Microsoft or in Azure today. And that's absolutely not the case. So the marketplace gives us a phenomenal portal to go in and find solutions that have been pre-built, pre-certified by the vendors we know and trust. So whether that is SAP, if you're running SAP today and you want to continue to run SAP in the cloud, rather than having to do a lot of guesswork around what resources SAP may require, you can go into the marketplace, download a certified build of SAP with all the Azure associated Azure resources, and it gives you that peace of mind in, I'm not having to work out and do the guesswork of what resources I require. I know that this has been certified by both Microsoft and the vendors, and that goes for security appliances. There are virtual firewalls. There are really a phenomenal range of vendors and tools in the marketplace that extends out beyond, I think, some of the traditional thinking of, well, Azure is Microsoft, so I must use Microsoft everything. It really is a phenomenally open platform. And we see things like, I believe around 70% of the workloads today are actually running on open source operating systems and not on Windows services. So really, an incredibly open platform, and they've made it even more open by having these offers in the marketplace. Cool. We've jumped through cost analysis. I think we've covered all of those. Had the demo. Over to migrations. So what I wanted to show today was, again, a phenomenal tool built into the Azure portal called Azure Migrate. And what this tool gives you is not only a migration tool from the aspect of many of the migration tools we might have been aware of for mailboxes and other things that grab some data or a config and moves it from one place to another. That would be one of the features, but it is so much more than that. So when we look at Azure Migrate, it takes us through that whole journey from analyzing what our current environment looks like, because I think that one of the trickiest parts of a migration is knowing what we have today, so we know what we need to move. I think there are always hidden aspects to our current environments that can make these migrations tricky. So from the analysis side, which I think is phenomenally important, by deploying a tool into your environment and getting an in-depth view of not only what resources exist in the environment, but also we start to look at what dependencies they have. So what VMs are speaking to other VMs, other disks, other resources. What do those dependencies look like, so that when we do the migration of a single service, as an example, we don't end up breaking 10 other services that were actually reliant on that one. So that dependency matrix becomes incredibly important. I'll show you on the tool. It gives you a visual representation of who's speaking to who and what are those connections look like, so that we can plan for them. It then takes you through, once we know what resources are available, what resources you have, there is a whole business case engine and costing engine built into the Azure Migrate tool. It does this by, one, gathering the information of what resources you have. It then asks some questions where you can fill in further information around your current costs. And then it takes that information and translates it into, if I move to Azure, based on the resources that I now know you would require, what would that business case look like? So it gives you a full business case tool out of the box, which, again, like most tools, the more information, the more data you feed it, the more accurate the results back to you are going to be. So when we jump into the platform, I'll show you how you can actually build out a business case, how it gives you that visibility of dependencies and sets you up so that before you even start any migration efforts, you know exactly where you're starting from. You've had the ability to do a financial overview of what the migration and post-migration resources will look like. And all of that can be set up and put in place before we even start to move resources or touch anything in the cloud. I think what we will do is, let me jump into the tool. I think it's going to be interesting for me to show you some of these in the tool. But really, we start off with assess. We've got migrate and modernize. And what you'll see is one of the newer features that's come out as part of Azure Migrate is the ability to do OS upgrades as part of the migration. So as an example, if you're coming from Windows 2012, and you want to move to 2016, that's something that the tool can do for you as it's migrating. So some really great features there to simplify moving to the cloud and also make it far more predictable. And I think that the predictable side gives us a comfort in knowing that, we go all the way back to the story we were talking about, shock bills. If you know what that bill is going to be before you've spent a cent on Azure, it again gives you that comfort, gives you the ability to plan and budget, and gives you a lot of information that you can feed back to the business, as opposed to build and see when the invoice comes, which I think a number of customers have done. And when that shock bill does come, then cloud starts to get the bad rap that it does around the potential for being wildly expensive. And absolutely, things can be expensive, but they don't have to be. And again, where they are expensive, we can show the true value behind every rand you're spending. Should be showing value back to the business. So let's jump into the tool. So we're going to go back there. Let me not download that. But again, I've got it popped up here, but we love search because it just works. So if we search for migrate and we pop in, this is your Azure Migrate tool. So a tool built into the Azure portal. What I have done is I've pre-linked this tool to a VMware environment we've got running in the office. This is where we can start to go through what that migration process would look like. And as I say, it's not just a tool for moving things. It's a tool for planning. It's a tool for budgeting. And then it does equally do the moving of those components once you're happy and comfortable with exactly what you're moving to. So you'll see here we've got servers, databases, and webs. We've got a specific database tool, and this becomes phenomenal for doing SQL assessments and then moving that SQL into the cloud. So there's a very specific tool there. VDI, if you're running VDI on-prem, web apps, and then Databox is an interesting one where if you have very large volumes of data, very large, we're talking sort of the 100 terabyte mark and up, instead of copying that data over your internet connection, there are physical devices available from Microsoft where an encrypted box gets shipped to you. You can upload that data onto the box. It then gets shipped to an Azure facility and uploaded on the Azure core. So not something that gets used very often, but a great tool to keep in the back of your mind, that if you are seeing a massive amount of data in front of you and you are concerned about getting it over your internet connection, there are tools available to physically move that data. We're going to jump into servers and web. I want to show you here. So I've plugged into an environment that has 13 servers running. I start to get breakdowns of the operating system distributions. I can see what's running Linux, what's on Windows. We can start to drill down, and I'll show you now when we drill down into the machines, not only what's running Windows, but what versions of Windows, what patches would be required before moving to the cloud. So this gives us a great assessment. And let's jump into the overview of what am I running today? What does that current environment look like? Now, when we're talking migrations, a general rule is I stay away from the big bang approach. I think there have been times where, we go in and, oh, well, you need to move your entire organization to cloud. And generally, that is a very risky and tricky approach. Sometimes all you need to do is go and move one machine. And that's where I think that this tool has got phenomenal value, that as an end customer, as someone working in Azure day to day, or not even working in it all the time, this tool gives you a click by click and very thorough approach to moving resources into the cloud. But equally, as we get into far more complex environments, that's where it becomes incredibly important to engage with a partner like Torito, who have that skill and background in moving large scale complex environments to the cloud and to hybrid environments. So I think that what this tool gives us is, for those simple migrations, it gives you a very concise and thorough approach that you can do simple migrations yourself. They don't need to be the scary M word of migration. It is something that you can go through. And then, as I say, when they do get complex, that's where it's phenomenal to have the backing of a partner like Torito to fall back on and get those services to do the move. So if we go in, we can have a look at our list of services. What we've done is, of the 13, we've actually deployed the replication for 3 of those. So you'll see that I've got 3 machines. It starts to tell me what applications are running. And then, as I was talking about earlier, the dependencies are a very interesting view. So let's go into, I think the jump box has dependencies. Let's have a look. While that's populating, this gives us that view of, if I were to move this machine today, what else is it attached to that could be impacted? And I think this is an incredibly important view. And here we've got a view of, I've got some clients here that are accessing this jump box. So if I were to do anything, it's going to have a direct impact on these specific clients. And we can start to go into what those are and what that impact could be. On the jump box itself, I can see the operating system, I can see IP addresses, I can start to get all of the information that I'm going to require when I actually start to do migrations. I think the other approach, and where this tool becomes incredibly important, is when cloud can become expensive, is when we take the approach of replicating exactly what I have on-prem and just putting it in the cloud. I've got a machine with 4 CPUs and 32 gigs of memory. One of the great things with Azure is the access that we have to the latest technology of CPUs and memory and resources. So this machine that may be running 4 CPUs and 32 gigs of RAM on-prem, you bought 5 years ago, and CPUs have come a hell of a long way from there. And it may be that today you could run the same services on 2 CPUs and half the RAM, because of the improvement in the quality and the efficiency of those components. So one area where cloud can, again, look very expensive is if we just take a pure view of what have I got on-prem and mirror it in the cloud. can be very expensive. And that's where the tool becomes important in making those recommendations of analyzing not only what resources are on-prem, but how are those resources being utilized, and then making recommendations around sizing and what machines would work best. So let's go one step back here. 2 steps back and jump down. So that's the assessment side where we start to get. Oh, I want to jump on business case before we move on from the side. So as we come in here and we start to build out the business case, you'll see there's a bunch of questions that get asked. And if you fill out this form with accurate information of your true costs, it will actually compare your current cost structure to the cost structure that it would be in Azure. So as you can see, that's preview. So that's a brand new feature that's come out fairly recently, but really a powerful tool in getting that insight. Let's have a look at our migrations page. And as I mentioned, we've taken 3 of the machines and started replicating those or that information into Azure. Now, what happens is when you start the replication, the Azure Migrate tool is using another phenomenal Azure tool called Azure Site Recovery. And the Azure Site Recovery is a replication tool that really replicates the config and data of virtual machines or servers into the cloud. And what it does is store that on a disk so that you're not running the physical resources at any point in time. You're purely storing that config and that data. And once you're ready, you can then convert that into a running machine. So we'll show you what that looks like. We've got 3 machines running here. I want to go into the migrate side, or not that migrate side. Replications. Right. So what we have here are those 3 machines we saw earlier. We've got one that is ready to migrate, so it's given us a health check. All of the components and operating systems are at a level that they're required to be, and it gives us that we're ready to migrate. So from this tool, I can come in here and then trigger the actual migration. So I've gone and assessed the environment. I've gathered all of that information. I've looked at the financial aspects. And then I can come in here and use that site recovery. Now that I have set up the replication and I've got the data into Azure, I can trigger either a test migration, and I've actually triggered that on the machine above, so we're going to show you what that looks like now. You can do a test migration and actually bring that machine up in Azure. Before you're ready to go full scale and turn off anything on-prem, you can bring that machine up in Azure and get a view of, will it boot? Does everything work fine? You know, again, get that sense of comfort that you are not doing anything big bang. You can do a lot of trial and error and test before you move. So test migrations are great. And once you're happy, you can then go into the actual migrate phase. So this one, you'll see we've already triggered the test migration. The next phase would be to clean up, which is, to me, a phenomenal tool. You know, testing resources in cloud are often where they get left behind and we end up with dormant resources. So there's actually a feature built in here that once the test is complete, I come and click clean up test, and it goes around and gets rid of all of that junk for me so that I don't end up leaving dormant resources all over the place, just having generating costs without any real value. So actually a great feature is the cleanup. As much as testing's great, the cleanup is equally quality. So I've now triggered this machine. So I've got my AVS jump box. If we go from here into our, actually got it open on this side, our virtual machines, we'll see here that we now have our AVS jump box running in Azure. It's a Windows machine. It's a B2MS. And all of this has been done without me having to configure a machine, copy data across, do any of that work myself. That's all been done by the tool. So we've taken that machine from VMware into Azure, assessed on the right size machine. So it takes away, again, that risk of having way too many resources. And as we saw earlier, it was a four CPU machine. We're actually running on 2 vCPUs with 8 gig of memory because that's all that's required. And again, if we had taken the approach of replicate what I have on-prem, that becomes very expensive very quickly, when actually all you require is 2 vCPUs and 8 gig of memory, not 4 and 32. So again, a way to optimize while moving so that you land in an optimized state rather than landing in a heavy state and then having to optimize over time. So a phenomenal tool, and we can see that machine's up and running here. We've got our Windows versions. I wanted to show you quickly on, I believe it's this machine. We have a Windows, no, that's Windows 22. Let me this machine then. So we're actually running a Windows 2012. So when I now go to the point of migration, I can actually trigger that as part of this migration. I can trigger the update from 2012 to 2016. So I don't, again, need to move and then start fixing things or go through the effort of updating on-prem. That can be done as part of the migration. Phenomenal. How are we doing for time, Colin? I think we are pretty much there. While I'm in here, do you want to take any quick questions on the tooling itself while I'm in the portal? Otherwise, what I'll do is
I think there is there is one quick there's a couple of questions, but one is relevant right now, which is Michael Eastman is asking, can Azure Migrate assess more than Microsoft products? And obviously,
yes, it can. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the Azure Migrate obviously has a lot of the Windows licensing tooling built into it. But equally, if you were running, and if we go all the way back out, if you were running a purely Linux-based environment on VMware, no Microsoft anywhere, you could use this tool. And as much as Azure is the Microsoft cloud, you can build an entire platform or solution without touching the Microsoft products, as in Windows or SQL. It could all be done on Linux and MySQL as an example. So yes, works well with Hyper-V, actually works better with VMware, surprisingly enough. So in some of these cases, it works better with the non-Microsoft version. So anyone who's running VMware works phenomenally. Equally, just for sort of bog standard servers that you're running without virtualization can be utilized as well. And yeah, we've got some Linux babies living here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, David. I think we are running a little bit short on time, so I think we can maybe get to Q&A. Another question here is from Kevin Fredericks. What is the best way to implement Azure with ZTNA, i.e. Zero Trust Network Access?
Yep.
How are they related? What do they have to do with each other?
Yeah, 100%. So I think Zero Trust is one of those, it's a mindset as much as it is an approach. So there are phenomenal ways to start to use the, sorry, I've gone completely blank on the term. Azure landing zones is what I was going for. So what an Azure landing zone gives you is basically a templatized approach that gets deployed across your entire subscription. And rather than having to go through and configure each and every small component within your configure, of which there are thousands. I mean, if you can imagine how many hundreds of services there are, each one of those has its own configuration and security policies. What landing zones allow you to do is have a templatized approach where you can deploy that into your subscription, and your policy management, your zero trust as an example, your user management, all of those hardening measures get applied by default. And it's also a template that has been certified by Microsoft and third parties. So that to me is the best approach in that you don't miss anything. I think one of the risks in Azure is that it is so vast and so expansive that you run that risk of missing a setting somewhere. Where Azure landing zones take away a lot of that in having it all pre-configured, and then you can obviously go in and tweak and adjust as you need.
Perfect, thank you. Mel, I think we've got some questions from when people RSVP'd. We're probably not going to have time for all of them. There were quite a few, but would you mind reading one or two?
Sure. So in your experience, have you found that the minority or majority of businesses pay more or less when moving to cloud from on-prem?
So I think it's a great question in that I think the majority if you do the basic of what did I buy the server for versus what does my cloud cost me, the cloud is going to look more expensive. As we start to do a thorough business case behind what am I spending on my generator contract and the power bill and the security, and you take all of these aspects into account, then the cloud becomes a far more favorable version. And I think that the vast majority end up saving when you look holistically at the costs that you incur. I think we do the cloud injustice oftentimes by leaving out a lot of the on-prem costs, and then because cloud inherently just includes all of that. It's not an option. It's not something you need to add or think about. It is included as the value proposition of cloud. We do cloud a bit dirty on those, but I think as we do thorough business cases and look really across all of our true costs of running on-prem, that's where cloud becomes a far more attractive proposition.
Awesome. We have hit 5. I don't know if you want me to sneak in one more or...
Yeah, maybe one more. Mel, wasn't there one in particular that I thought was quite good, and David's touched on it, but I remember we chatted about it, question number 5. Does that ring a bell, or where is that list?
Sure. Is that the SQL question? Because I left that one out because we kind of answered.
It might have been.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was around serverless. And again, just to kind of touch on it, it really is a trend that we're seeing in talking about costs and about efficiency. Every component that you don't need to run is another component you don't need to worry about. You don't need to worry about configuring it. So when we look at database as a service, when we look at web apps, the more components we can remove from the back end, the less you need to worry about day to day. And as much as I'm sure we all love patching operating systems, if you don't need an operating system, that's just one less task in your day. So that really is the drive behind the approach, is use what you need. As I say, if you need a database, you don't need a Windows license and gigs of RAM, and that's not what you need. You need the database. So consume the database.
Thanks. Yeah, that was definitely the question. So I think a quick recap, David, and tell me if you agree or disagree. But from a cost perspective, we talked about simplifying, and you've just talked about it again now. So if you were using 100 resources, let's just call them resources on-prem, if you do your analysis, probably you might only need 50 in Azure, as an example. Secondly, there's way more ability to actually look at granular detail around what you're spending in terms of resources, setting alerts, setting them up, by business division or any other sort of criteria you wish to monitor, and depending on what your financial people are putting you under pressure for. I'm not going to make fun of them, by the way. I'm one of them. But and then from a migration perspective, about how easy it can be and how that Azure migrate. I also want to point out that a lot of the tools that David has shown us are quite new. I dare say it, a year ago, it was quite complex to move a lot of stuff into Azure. Nowadays, because of the tool that David has shown you and a couple other ones that exist, you are able to see these dependencies. You're able to see what's going to break when you migrate, because stuff will break. No one's saying that it isn't, but you're able to see it up front and deal with it and handle it, and figure out if the software people need to get involved, or if it's a simple pointing at a different IP address type of situation. So you're able to deal with all of that stuff up front with the right tools, and the migration can be a lot easier than you think. Also, spinning up demo environments or tests without switching the live services off is a massive thing. Does that all sound?
I concur with all of that, and I think the one point that I want to add is obviously there are some phenomenal gentlemen and ladies on the call from Torito who, as Colin mentioned, I work with on a day-to-day, and I think that the true value that comes is these guys have been doing migrations before the tools were available. So they've done it the dirty way. They know all the hidden secrets. Now that the tools are available, it becomes a lot more visible. It becomes a lot simpler to have that visibility, but to have the resources behind you and have a partner behind you is incredibly important, because there's always going to be a tricky one that pops up, or a tricky case, or some complexity, and that's where having the skills and the resources of a partner like Terito, to me, is incredibly important. So as much as Azure wants to make everything click through and super available to the end user, it still can be complex, and that's when it becomes time to call in the big guns.
Okay, stop, David. We're blushing. Thank you very much. We do have a couple more questions that are coming through, but I think we are a bit out of time, and last time we did run over, so I'm a bit conscious of time. So I'm afraid I'm going to stop there. And David, thank you. That was brilliant, and I hope that the semi-technical or very technical people in the room got some insights and saw new stuff. I definitely did. So thank you very much. I also just want to add quickly that there are ways of doing POCs even above and beyond the tool, and we can get funding from Microsoft, either from Microsoft or from Terito. So if anyone wants to talk about doing a POC that's going to cost some money, chat to us, and there are ways that we can do that for free. So without further ado, I want to introduce Sean Guns, who's just switched on his screen. He's definitely not interested in migrating to Azure and probably slept through that presentation, but now that he's on, it's going to be phenomenal. Very excited. I'm very excited because I've done a lot of these with Sean, and he's a legend. Sean, welcome, and take it away.
Cool, thanks, Colin. Yeah, I must say that one was I zoned out a little bit.